12 more hostages and 30 Palestinian prisoners are exchanged as the temporary truce between Israel and Hamas is extended.
NATO reiterates its support for Kyiv at the inaugural meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council.
The EU's climate commissioner tells Euronews that the global community must be more ambitious at COP28.
Wars, high interest rates and inflation will cause the global economy to slow down next year, according to the OECD.
Hundreds of Palestinians lined the streets of Ramallah late Tuesday to welcome 30 Palestinian prisoners freed by Israel in the latest swap with hostages in Hamas captivity. This was the fifth day of the temporary truce between Israel and Hamas after a 48-hour extension was agreed. The military wing of Hamas Al-Qassam Brigades posted a video late on Tuesday, this time showing crowds in Rafah, greeting a convoy of vans arriving at the meeting point where the militants handed 12 hostages to the Red Cross. There were marked celebrations among Israelis gathered in Sderot who cheered as the vehicles transporting the released hostages arrived. Hamas and other militants still hold about 160 hostages out of 240 seized in their October 7th assault on southern Israel that ignited the war. A spokesman for the Israeli government has said it would be open to an additional 5 days of truce under the current hostage-prisoner exchange agreement. During the pause in fighting, the UN World Food Programme is delivering desperately needed food to more than 120,000 people in Gaza, but has reiterated that the supplies it was able to provide were woefully inadequate to address the level of hunger.
Hundreds of thousands that are facing an immediate risk of starvation. WFP hopes for the extension of this pause, which offered a window of relief that could pave the way for a longer-term calm. Safe and impeded humanitarian access cannot stop now.
While there does appear to be a willingness to extend the truce, which is due to end after one more captive exchange on Wednesday night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the fighting will resume with full force.
Scrutiny and increased moderation are essential when it comes to identifying hate speech on the internet. That's according to a new study by the European Union's Agency for Fundamental Rights, FRA. The report, which focused on more than 1,500 social media posts in Bulgaria, Germany, Italy and Sweden, found that hate speech is on the rise and women are the main target. Reddit, the social network X, YouTube and Telegram were the 4 platforms surveyed, and almost half of the posts were considered to be direct harassment. It found that people of African descent, Jews and Roma people were also heavily targeted. This follows what researchers have flagged as a huge surge in Islamophobic and anti-Semitic posts since the Israel-Hamas war began. According to the Jewish advocacy group the Anti-Defamation League, hate speech against Jews has soared more than 919% on X. FRA says independent regulators are imperative to anticipate possible violations of fundamental rights.
Ukraine's foreign minister greeted by NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. This second day of the military alliance's gathering in Brussels saw an inaugural meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council. Ahead of the talks, Kyiv said Ukraine needs more weapons for its fight against Russia.
It will not be an exaggeration to say that defending Europe without Ukraine is a futile task. You cannot do it simply for one simple reason, because we currently have the strongest and the most battle-hardened army in Europe.
At the gathering, NATO allies vowed to remain steadfast in their commitment to further step up political and practical support to Ukraine.
Welcome to this first meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Council at the level of foreign ministers. We remain unwavering in our commitment to Ukraine. We are determined that Ukraine will one day sit at this table as a full member of our alliance.
The meeting also saw the return of former British Prime Minister David Cameron, this time as Foreign Secretary. On the ongoing war, Stoltenberg said Ukraine has inflicted heavy losses on Russia.
Brussels is accusing Poland of not doing enough to put an end to a round-the-clock blockade by truckers and farmers on the border with Ukraine.
For days, thousands of lorries have been stranded in queues as truckers claim they are losing out to Ukrainian companies transporting goods inside the European Union.
There is not good faith in finding a solution. This is my evaluation today, and it's a nearly complete lack of involvement of Polish authorities. And I'm saying that because the Polish authorities are the ones who are supposed to enforce the law at that border. And while I support the right of people to protest, the entire EU, not to mention Ukraine, a country currently at war, cannot be taken hostage by blocking our external borders. It's as simple as that.
Polish truckers started the protest earlier this month to call on Brussels to force Ukrainian counterparts to obtain a permit to enter the bloc, except for those carrying humanitarian aid or military supplies. This would be a return to a previous system that was paused after Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine last year. They argue that they are losing out to Ukrainian companies that are offering cheaper rates to transport goods. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drivers have been waiting in their trucks to cross the border as temperatures are now freezing, and many are worried about the situation back home.
Musimy ze sobą się dogadać i jak najszybciej, dlatego że w Ukrainie wojna, giną ludzie co dzień. Biznes też ważny, ale tam giną normalnie ludzie i znikają miasta i wioski.
The European Commission says it is talking to all parties involved to find a solution, but also stressed that it could intervene to ensure rules are respected and laws are followed.
The international community meets Thursday in Dubai for the UN climate conference, and the European Union intends to make its voice heard with a simple message to its partners. We must be more ambitious.
Hey guys. Hello, Commissioner. Hi.
The bar is simply very high because, not because we want to, but because scientists tell us so. So we do need to deliver as a global community on mitigation, driving down emissions, making sure we have emissions peak in 2025. It is coming up with a credible tripling targets of renewables. It is energy efficiency and it is driving out methane.
For the EU, the establishment of the first global stocktake at COP28 will be an important step in assessing the efforts made since the 2015 Paris Agreement and what still needs to be done to limit the rising temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Global stocktake is what the word really says. It is taking stock, seeing where we stand. But more importantly is then how to move forward. And the reality is that we have the direction correct, but we simply need to run faster. We need to do more going forward. So stocktaking is here also equivalent with higher ambitions and countries pledging to doing more.
The EU and developed countries will be eagerly awaited by their partners on the issue of financing climate action and the loss and damage fund set up at the previous COP. This tool is intended to respond to the damage caused by the adverse effects of climate change. But questions remain about who will contribute to the fund. The solidarity expected by developing countries requires funding.
We have been working tirelessly, also here from within the European Union, to see how we can deliver on more funding and on loss and damage. I am more optimistic than a couple of weeks ago that we can deliver on this critical element. And making sure we get the financing right is a very important part, also in building trust.
The EU's climate commissioner says it's difficult to pinpoint the indicators that will make it possible to determine whether COP28 can be called a success or failure. For observers, it'll be necessary to look at the ambition of the commitments announced in order to assess whether or not the international community is making progress on climate change.
Intense snowfall in the north of the United States, the first of the season, creating dangerous conditions on the roads. Ohio is the worst-hit state. The whiteout around the Great Lakes region along the Canadian border is due to a weather phenomenon called lake effect snow, caused by a collision between cold air from the north and the warmer water of the lakes. The subsequent convection leads to heavy snowfall. Winter weather warnings are in effect in several areas across the region.
An island around 600 miles south of Tokyo has grown by 50 meters since the start of November after volcanic activity. According to the Japanese Coast Guard, its eruption reached a height of 200 meters. Footage of Nijima Island in Japan's Ogasawara archipelago was captured by drones. The Coast Guard said it's monitoring the volcano and will issue navigational warnings and other advisories regarding the eruption. For now, it's urging caution for vessels navigating close by.
The strain of wars, inflation, and high interest rates will cause the global economy to falter next year, despite better than expected GDP growth in 2023. That's according to the OECD, which predicted that economic growth would slow to 2.7% next year, down slightly from the expected figure of 2.9% this year, marking the slowest calendar year growth since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic.
We remain worried about inflation. If inflation were to prove more persistent, further tightening would be necessary, pushing growth down further.
The economies of the 20 countries that use the euro were hit by high interest rates and energy prices after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Growth in the Eurozone is predicted to hit 0.9% next year, weak compared to China and the United States, but still an improvement from a predicted 0.6% growth this year. But the OECD warned that the full impact of interest rates in the Eurozone is still uncertain, due in part to the region's high level of bank financing.